everyone, welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday. And today for this first What I Would Have Done Thursday for the month of December, I thought it would be interesting to briefly talk about Frozen again, since I did mention it as a film that I felt was very overrated and overhyped. I did mention sort of why I thought that is in the overrated video a little while back, but I thought it would be interesting to now talk about what I would have done instead had I been behind the scenes when making the Frozen film. Now, personally, I think the title The Snow Queen is actually a way better title than Frozen. So having it be the Snow Queen, I think, would work more to the film's advantage, at least. But basically, there are certain things within this film that I think could have resulted in better outcomes had they focused more on the original source material by Hans Christian Andersen. It is claimed that this film is an adaptation of it or an interpretation, but it is so far loose and stretched that it barely even a smudge resembles what goes on within the Hans Christian Andersen tale. That's something that I definitely would have focused more on, because I think if they put in more of those elements in there, you probably would have seen a stronger product. And I think usually when Disney follows the source material on a certain level, again, it doesn't have to be completely, but if it goes on a more looser level but still staying sort of true to the story, usually I think it results in better outcomes for them. And again, this is all opinion based. I'm not trying to say that my version of Frozen is somehow superior, but what I am saying is the issues that I had with the film I think could have been resolved by the things that I'm going to suggest in this video. And I'm not trying to claim myself any higher and that, somehow I know better than somebody else. But if you want cool ideas, Disney, call me. If you need anything, you know where to find me. I'm on the internet. But I'm here. Anyway, so again, this is just me throwing out ideas. I'm not saying that my ideas are any better, but if people like my ideas, then you know where to find me, Disney. So without further ado, let me go to the topic of Frozen. Now again, what I mean by staying true to the Hans Christian Andersen tale is that ultimately that would have meant that Elsa would have had to been a villain. Now they sort of hyped it up before the trailers, that was the angle that they were going for, but then ultimately once the trailers came out, it could have hinted at it at some point that it was what they were trying to do, but at the end of the day, that's not what we got. Elsa wasn't a villain. She was just a misunderstood hero that we see so many times from Disney. What could have been done instead is, again, I think, made her a villain. I think this approach would have been a whole lot better for Disney. And I think we could make her a misunderstood villain in the sense that, yeah, she does something horrible, but there are certain circumstances that eventually leads her to making, poor decisions. And I think if they gone for a curse scenario, too, I think that also would have benefited them. But basically what I would have done with the story primarily is again, established most of what happens in the Hans Christian Andersen tale. Now, in case you don't know what happens in the Hans Christian Andersen tale, well, basically, there is the Snow Queen, but they don't really give a whole lot of context to her as a character, really, and to how she becomes who she is. So I would have provided a whole exposition onto that. So basically what I would have done is I would have said, okay, there is this queen, and we're gonna replace it with just the Snow Queen. We're not talking about Elsa right now. We're talking Snow Queen, who really should be Elsa as a character. She is a queen, and she rules the land. She's the only surviving of her kin, of her family. Hence, we get Disney cliche, but I mean, that's pretty much in a majority of fairy tales. Parents are usually never around. So I think establishing her as someone who is very vain, very self-centered, very ruthless, greedy, you know, all of these sort of negative attributes that are associated with a villain. But I think they could have provided some context too in saying that the people that were within the king and queen circles, you know, maybe they spoiled her, maybe they gave her a certain amount of luxury, and, you know, basically they let her walk all over them. I think that could have had some context too. Sort of similar to the introduction of Beauty and the Beast, where we have Beast being cursed for doing something bad. And I think doing this to a female character would actually be a very interesting approach, because this is something, again, we haven't seen before, and it sort of is a teaching lesson. It's designed to have a moral to it. So again, I think putting this approach, I think, would have been really interesting. Now, the way I would have highlighted the curse is basically like so. So basically, she's thumping all over her people, you know, not being a good ruler, you know, sort of, you know, Marie Antoinette. Well, then let them eat cake. You know, she could care less. She just wants to live in her luxury, her happy world, and doesn't want to take responsibility. That's another thing too that I think they could have highlighted, an aspect of not taking responsibility. You know, always blaming other people, you know, that whole angle I think they could have done. So what ultimately ends up happening is that the people, meaning the common folk of the kingdom, get sick and tired of her. They're like, we need to get rid of this girl. I mean, there's no replacement, you know, there's no bloodline left, but we got to get rid of her. You know, we don't want this ruler anymore. So they go to this witch or sorceress or person with magic powers, okay? Which I think makes more sense than trolls. Like, what? Trolls suddenly have powers? Okay. But yes, that's what I would have done. I would have had it been a witch or a sorceress. I would have had the townspeople go to her and be like, hey, and you know, they could have made the queen, or the sorceress or witch, have her live in a fairly like secluded location, so she's a little hard to find. But then they stumble upon her, and then they say, hey, I think we got a solution here. And let's use your powers to defeat her. And she says, well, all I can really do is curse her, and sort of destroy her power. And you could make her sort of limited in her capacity to really do any real harm to her, but basically she sort of puts on a curse that sort of again resembles similar to what the Beast had, except with him it was the curse revolved around him he had no love for anybody in his heart, so he needed to find someone to love him in return. and then therefore he would love that person in return at the same time. So it was like a mutual exchange curse. This one I would have made completely on the Snow Queen to change. And that would mean, she's got no love in her heart. She's frozen. She has a frozen heart. And they could describe her again as very cold, very unfriendly, very just no warmth in her, no light, no color. She's just pale. She's cold-hearted. So the curse would basically be, okay, you're cursed, Snow Queen, to survive only on snow. You can't live in an environment where there isn't snow, because you have no warmth in your heart. Also, Snow Queen, you can't, at the same time, you will be cursed with the powers of snow. So basically, you will have certain abilities that will be given to you, but that can allow you to sort of survive. But you won't have the ability to survive in a normal environment. You have to survive in a very cold climate. And the kingdom could have been not in such a cold climate. They could have been in a fairly, I'm not saying that they had to live in the Bahamas, but I mean they could have lived in an area where there wasn't maybe a whole huge abundance of snow. Or when it would snow excessively, it would snow in the winter, if anything, within one season. And basically overthrow her ability to get to have power over the land. So that's what I would have done. I would have made her powers be powers that are based within, creating snow, and using snow, and all that, but I would have limited it to the fact that she wouldn't be able to survive in a normal environment, and that she would need snow in order to survive, which would overthrow her ability to have any power. So that's sort of her punishment. And that's sort of what the sorcerer lays down. She says, "Hey, that's pretty much all I can do for you." And the townspeople go, "Okay, yeah, let's curse her. Let's overthrow her and curse her." And so they do overthrow her by having the sorcerer basically put the curse on her. But being a nice sorceress / witch she sort of gives her a chance, for sort of similar to the beast, where she's like, "Hey, can you," but instead of saying, "Hey, can you let me in," she's kind of like, she asks the Snow Queen if she could have maybe something to eat, something warm to eat, because it's cold outside and there's not a whole lot of food to go around. And so the queen could have been like, "Nope, screw you. I'm not giving you any of my warmth or anything." And then the witch could have said, "Okay, all right, then you have a frozen heart," and then basically outlines everything to her within the curse, and says, "Yeah, you won't be able to live without snow, and you'll be cursed to basically roam the mountains, and yeah, nobody will love you because you won't love others in return, and you won't show anybody respect or dignity." So I would have done that. Had her be cursed, because then that would have made sense. that would have provided context, and we would have actually had a character that did something wrong, and learn from their mistake. I think that would have been a whole lot more interesting. And then she basically the witch tells her, hey, the only way you um, can unveil this curse is once you learn to love, the spell will be broken. But clearly, the the Snow Queen has no idea how to love or to be a good person. So all of these years time pass, and she um, and so and sort of people forget about her. They forget about the kingdom, and then most people, they don't even have a kingdom anymore. They just have kind of like farms, and people just kind of live in more of a countryside environment. There's no commerce or anything. So yeah, pretty much the whole economy just goes agriculture. Um, and you could have had that been sort of the effect, because again, no ruler, no leadership, kingdom gone. And so the kingdom is sort of kind of like abandoned. Um, and it also could have been too that the Snow Queen is cursed to eternal life as well. So I think that would have been another interesting part, because then she has, again, more of an excessive time to live, and it might be a motivation for her to stay with this curse as opposed to trying to become better. Also, I think adding in some kind of hypnotizing powers would also be another interesting thing um, to add in. And it could be hypnosis through, just her snow. Like she'll paint this pretty snow picture for you, and then suddenly you're bound to her will. That would have been, I think, another interesting element to add in there. So that's basically the whole curse, the whole backstory to the Snow Queen. So after that, after years pass by, there is this girl and boy. Now you could make the girl and boy brother and sister. You could make them, um, love interests or whatever. But either way, they basically live, in an agriculture environment, and they're told about this story of the Snow Queen, and she's almost become a legend at this point, because time has passed excessively, so there's nobody really, she just kind of fades into myth. And but still older people kind of take it more seriously. And so they tell the kids, hey, don't go out when there's an excessive amount of snow, because basically what the Snow Queen does, and what she is said to have done over the years, is basically capture people, hypnotize them and basically capture them, so that she will have people to rule over, and so they will serve her and do whatever they want for her by her hypnosis, or excuse me, her ability to hypnotize. So yes, I think that would have been really, really interesting, and would have added a whole lot and provided a clear explanation. So that's, I think, definitely what could have set up the plot. Because eventually what happens in the Hans Christian Andersen stories is, again, the little boy gets captured and then the little girl has to save him. So, yeah, you could have had development with the two main characters, the boy and the girl, who love each other either platonically or not platonically, doesn't matter. And then the boy ultimately ends up being seduced by the Snow Queen. Because, like sometimes what little boys do, they do what their parents tell them not to do, or grandmas, I guess in this case, because really there's only grandma mentioned here. So yeah, that could have been the story. She hypnotizes him and basically makes her one of her servants. So, and basically she rules in the mountains, and again she has a whole palace and all that stuff up there, because there's snow. There's a high altitude, and so therefore she can survive. So that's how I would set it up. And then once the little boy gets captured, the little girl goes out and saves her, tries to save him. You know, there's little stumbles that she makes along the way, again, similar to what the Hans Christian Andersen story did. And then when eventually she gets there to where the Queen's palace is, she has her showdown with the Snow Queen, and then and literally the Snow Queen is on the verge of literally killing her, because basically you could have had there could have been a stop that the little girl made where basically she finds out ultimately what ended up happening to the boy, because she's sort of looking kind of mindlessly until she stumbles upon the right plot points. And then one of the plot points could have been that she receives this little vial or something, and that protects her from the Snow Queen's hypnosis. So basically the Snow Queen can't hypnotize her. So the only way that she can really defeat her is by killing her. So so she doesn't get one of her prizes, which is the little boy. But and then again, she could have seen, the Snow Queen could have seen the sacrifice that the little girl was willing to make, or girl, however old you want to make her, doesn't matter. That the price that she was willing to pay for another human being, the boy, and she could have seen this act as very powerful, and then that could have changed her view on everything, and could have resulted in her seeing the good within herself, and then seeing the love that the little girl had for the boy, because she was willing to go to such lengths and such determination. And again, you know, the Snow Queen could have had you could have had like a mirror teleporter where she could see like all these different things, and maybe one of them she was able to see the little girl, you know, maybe similar to like Ursula's orb in Little Mermaid, or something to that effect. I think that could have been another interesting addition to the tale. You could have had that in there, and I think it would have definitely worked. But yeah, I think there could have been that sort of explanation too, and there could have been sort of a vengeance with the Snow Queen as well, because again, she is angry at her people. She is angry at the fact that they turned on her and that they gave her this curse. You know, she has a lot of vengeance and wants to sort of rekindle what she had, that power. But then at the same time, she realizes that true power comes through loving and respecting one another. And then she ultimately is lifted from the curse by seeing this this willingness of the little girl to sacrifice herself and put herself on the line for the little boy. And then ultimately, this could have resulted again in the Snow Queen losing all her powers because she learns to love. And then she returns to the kingdom and tries to establish herself as the rightful ruler of the land. And that would be the end. Would have been, I think, definitely a lot more truer to the Hans Christian Andersen story. With, again, adding these little twists and turns to it that, make it more of an interesting approach, I think. Usually we don't see villains turn good in Disney. I don't even think we've ever seen a villain turn good in Disney. All the villains have maintained their evil nature. But I think this interpretation would be a lot more fascinating because we get the sense of a villain's story. We do get an understanding of the Snow Queen and does it in a way that reflects onto ourselves and our ability to, take responsibility for who we are and ultimately, change for the better. And I think this interpretation would have suited itself well. And I think would have been a lot more interesting, a lot more engaging than I think what really resulted with Frozen. And again, I'm not saying that you couldn't have had an Olaf in there. I mean, you probably could have inserted him at one point. But is he really necessary? Not really to the story. I mean, it doesn't really add much. But again, that's all based on what your views are. But I personally feel that had they gone with this villain angle, had they maintained a little bit of what originally was in the source material, had they given context into the Snow Queen's backstory and provided a little bit of exposition in regards to what ultimately ends up happening to her, then I think we would have gotten something very interesting and would, I think, have resembled a lot more of what a fairy tale was than what was in Frozen. Because when I saw Frozen, I didn't feel like I was watching a fairy tale, really, because it doesn't really have a lot of the fairy tale elements except magic and trolls. But I think that's really what I would have done. I think the problem with this kind of interpretation is usually I don't think we like showcasing females as villains, although Disney has done it in the past and continues to do so. I think that seeing a villain within this kind of interpretation and have her being female is something that I think usually we don't see. Usually we don't see a lot of female characters take responsibility. Usually we don't see a lot of female characters having to realize ultimately that or admit wrongdoing. And I think this one would go into it. And I think that's what establishes a great ruler and a great leader, is if you can take responsibility for the mistakes that you've made. And I think would have been a lot more of an interesting tale than a tale about two sisters, which we've seen from Disney before, Lilo and Stitch, and is something that we've seen extensively through Disney's lineup with family and such. This would, I think, have been a little bit more of territory that they haven't really delved into all that much. So that's another thing that I think's important to realize when it comes to this this interpretation of what I would have done. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. I totally understand if people have sort of a different viewpoint as to what I would have done with this film, but I still feel like that having her as a villain, having this sort of exposition, giving, again, context to the story, would have made this story, I think, a lot more fascinating, a lot more engaging, and a lot less repetitive. And I think would definitely have been would have been something that Disney didn't really do before. Ultimately, though, I think that's really all I can say. Again, but I totally understand, and I'm totally open to whatever anybody else has to say. But I think that's really all I can say. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.